That's what the House is going to do. That I'll call the regular meeting of Council for Tuesday, December 19th to order. There were no questions provided by the public. Looking to the agenda, are there changes, additions? Seeing none, move the agenda be approved as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Looking to the minutes of November 28th, public hearing for bylaw 2017-30. Are there errors or omissions? Seeing none, I'll move the minutes be adopted as presented. Looking then to the minutes of the December 5th regular meeting of Council. Did I not call the question? I'm getting ahead of myself. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. My mind was moving on. Looking to the minutes of the December 5th regular meeting of Council. Errors or omissions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Now then, business rising from the minutes. And I see some of the presenters are here. In recognition that administration has already indicated that their intent is to continue doing the work to explore organic waste handling along the lines of what the core group has requested. At this time, I'll simply move that Council refer the request to administration for further, no, that's not the motion. It's on the overhead. To inform the work being done by the town regarding organic waste handling with recommendations to be presented to Council prior to or as a part of the 2019 budget discussions. And just in speaking to that motion, I think that captures the intent of the core group to be certain that the town is doing the work that they and others have requested. And through this motion, it's specific direction to administration to do that work and bring it back to be part of the 2019 budget discussions. And I think it reflects the commitment that all councillors have made to following up on this in 2018. Councillors want to speak to the motion? Councillor Comfort.
Unfortunately, I wasn't present for that meeting, but I do want to commend the work that this group is doing and pursuing this in a very civilized, thorough, and inclusive way. And it's an important thing for us to advance. It's complicated, it's difficult, but we need to do it. So I'm glad to see this coming forward. I have a question, if I may, to administration perhaps. When would the 2019 budget discussions happen?
Ms. DeSoto?
Well, they'll officially start at strategic planning in January when we start to formulate council's priorities for the next 3 to 4 year term. But formally putting numbers to the strategic plans starts in the summer with the approval of budget guidelines by council and then full-on discussion of costs and budget implications in November of next year.
Follow-up, if I may. So would I be right to assume then this would form part of our strategic planning discussions in January?
Yes.
Okay,
yes,
great.
Yeah, I would certainly see it being part of the strategic planning discussion, which will then give additional direction to administration to proceed with through the Q2, Q3, really to inform the final budget discussions that start in the fall. Are there members of council who wish to speak to the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And thanks for the work CORE is doing on behalf of our community. It is, as Councillor Comfort suggested, really important work. The town has been very committed to all of the difficult work that's being done to manage all of our waste streams. We certainly came through with a very comprehensive approach to handling recycling, and I have every confidence that we'll apply the same diligence and successful approach to organics. Thank you. This time I'll move on to item G1, Economic Development Next Steps. Ms. DeSoto.
Is this anybody's? Thank you, Mayor Borman, members of council. I'm here to seek your approval for establishment of an in-house economic development department. As you're aware, the town has been without a provider of economic development services since the dissolution of Canmore Business and Tourism, or CBT, back in the fall of 2016. I believe you're also aware that we have a business registry bylaw that sets out a licensing fee structure for businesses in town, and the revenues collected from that process have been historically used to fund economic development services. So we do have a dedicated source of funding for economic development. But through 2017, Council decided at the budget deliberations for this year that we would not specifically fund an economic development service provider, but rather we would use the business licensing revenues to fund individual economic development-based initiatives throughout the year. And that would give us some time to evaluate a go-forward approach for economic development services. So the list of projects that Council funded in 2017 is included in the attachment that was provided with the staff report. But it includes a number of key economic development related initiatives, including $50,000 for grants towards community event plans, $60,000 towards a broadband master plan, $10,000 towards online taxi training programs, $25,000 recently approved to support the Innovate Canmore initiative of the Chamber of Commerce, and most recently, the $200,000 support for the 2026 Olympic bid exploration. So that was a total of $345,000 drawn from the Economic Development Reserve and funded by business licensing revenues. And so what have we done over the year to specifically evaluate how best to deliver economic development services? The report outlines a number of steps administration went through, which included speaking directly with the EDO, or Economic Development Officer, that had previously been working for CBT. She left a detailed report and background documents on what she believed was the best way forward. I also met with the regional manager for the province for the Regional Economic Development Office, and both of those individuals strongly recommended that economic development services be brought in-house. And that was supported by the research we did, actually Catherine Van Kaimpima did, when she followed up and contacted 17 different municipalities, either through their website themselves or calling them, and discovered that of those 17 municipalities in and around our area and into BC, only one municipality did not have an in-house economic development department. I also met with local business sector organizations because we were curious to see, with the dissolution of CBT, what would unfold, whether CBT would rise in some other form, either specifically just looking at tourism-based services, which is what's happened with the formation of TCK, but also speaking with the Canmore Hotel and Lodging Association, with the BRZ, who's had an interest in economic development initiatives specifically as they relate to the downtown businesses, and with the new Chamber of Commerce, who, as you know, is taking some big steps forward in some of the work they're doing with Innovate Canmore. But in the meetings we've had with all of those business sector organizations, they all supported an in-house economic development resource to help bring the disparate groups together and help coordinate activities across all business sectors. Because all of those business organizations are specifically looking within their own sector and don't take a necessarily broad-based sector approach. So based on that, Research Administration is recommending that we do move forward and establish an in-house economic development department, and that department would report through to the General Manager of Municipal Services, who is Sally Cottle, and specifically would oversee our Arts and Events department. As noted in the staff report, the research showed that there is no real predominant reporting structure of the municipalities that we surveyed. Some report through to planning, some report directly through to the CAO, but specifically in thinking about how we as a municipality operate and what has been in the forefront of economic development in Canmore, the tourism services and specifically events, we did see that there was strong alignment with the municipal services division, specifically in aligning with social and cultural aspirations of the community, and also good alignment with events. And you can see that even in the programs that have been funded this year, $50,000 of the Economic Development Reserve was used to fund community events. So I thought I would just take a moment to walk through the department narrative that is been drafted to mirror sort of what we produce for each in-house department within the town of Canmore in our budget and business plan documents. Can people read that?
Yeah.
So specifically, the mission of the Economic Development Department would be to serve the community and enhance our quality of life by working with existing and prospective businesses and community partners to create a diverse economy that's resilient to change. And that diverse economy that's resilient to change reflects Canmore's goal statement in your strategic plan. The core functions, there's 4 main core functions with some sub-bullets, but to facilitate stakeholder alignment, to support business retention and expansion. One of the key learnings and tenets of economic development is that the majority, up to 70 or 80% of new business in any community is typically generated from existing businesses already located in that community. So having a strong business retention and expansion program is a core foundation of a good economic development program. The third one would be to support business innovation and diversification. And lastly, to support the Arts and Events Department in the delivery of their strategic objectives. From an organizational perspective, we see there being 2 FTEs in this department. The process as it would unfold would be that administration would seek to hire an economic development officer or EDO, and then we would work with that new person to evaluate the needs for skill levels and support staff within that department. But we do see it as being likely a second individual, but possibly 2 half-time individuals, et cetera, with different skill sets. It would depend on how that process of evaluation works with the head of the department. I won't go through the key accomplishments that happened in 2017 because we've already discussed those. From a 2018 priority perspective, as I just stated, we would be hiring an EDO and support staff, orientating new staff to town systems and processes, And then connecting with key stakeholders and leaders in the partner organizations, and there's a whole host of them as listed. In discussions with other EDOs in municipalities and with the provincial representative, particularly in the Regional Economic Development Office, they suggested that this landscape in Canmore is one that we should be proud of and one that should be supported, that if we did not have these business organizations operating and being effective in our community, that your economic development officer would likely be dragged into those areas. So a key role of an economic development officer is to help facilitate a bringing of the mind, so to speak. So whether it would be some form of a multi-stakeholder group of these representatives, but also in understanding the programs and services that they deliver, and in ensuring in whatever way possible that we don't have duplication of services across organizations and that they're all working together, pulling in the same direction. We also expect that the new EDO would spend some time creating a strategic business plan for the next 3-year time frame. And part of that might be to actually set up a new, or fund a new economic development strategic plan. We do have an old strategic plan known as the Economic Development and Tourism Strategic Plan. Sustainable Economic Development and Tourism Strategic Plan, I think.
SEDS for short.
SEDS for short. It's, you know, it had been used as a guide or a bit of a compass to guide previous economic development activities. It may just need a refresh, but it would also need some collaboration with the new tourism office in TCK and likely some of those partner organizations moving forward. What else is up there? And specifically within the Arts and Events Department, there is a proposed cultural master plan for 2018. Much of what encompasses a cultural master plan is about creating exciting spaces and creative places in a municipality. Those kind of spaces in turn encourage business development and growth of communities. So there is a natural link to have the EDO position associated in helping to assist with the development of a cultural master plan as well. From a budget perspective, there's no real amendment to the budget that will be coming forward for you in the next presentation by Catherine Van Campina, but the $320,000 that's in the current 2018 budget has been associated or has been dedicated to contract services. So as we say, we would use those funds, which are the business registry funds predicted to be collected in 2018, to fund the salary, wages, and benefits for the department, and also some support resources for office supplies, advertising, contract services, etc. So the budget proposed is there. It just moves the transfer from reserve of $320,000, which was done in 2017, to allocating it out to the various expenditure areas within the budget. That's generally the gist of the department. We're supportive of bringing it on. There is an alternative proposed for Council's consideration, which is to wait until there's greater understanding of the potential costs of a 2026 Olympic bid before making a decision on how to allocate the economic development funds collected through the business registry. As you know, and was stated earlier, you've already drawn up to $200,000 from the Economic Development Reserve to support the 2026 Olympic bid work. Potentially there will be other costs associated with that bid, and there is no identified source of funding for those in 2018. We don't know what those will be, and so by allocating the Economic Development Reserve to an Economic Development Department, it will essentially mean that those funds will not be available to support an Olympic bid effort. So we would have to find funds from other reserves and or taxes to support that work. Administration isn't recommending that we wait because we do believe that the skills of an experienced EDO could actually assist with the Olympic bid review and in seizing some of those economic development opportunities that will likely be associated with that Olympic bid. Right now, when somebody comes to town, a new business or a young entrepreneur, and they want to talk to somebody about establishing a new business in town, there isn't an office. There is nobody necessarily for that person to go to. There are a number of organizations, you know, whether it be the Chamber or the BRZ or BODA or TCK, but they're not looking holistically across the entire business sector community to deliver economic development services. So that's all I wanted to say formally. I'm happy to answer any questions, should there be any, but we're recommending that Council approve the establishment of an in-house economic development department in accordance with the department and business plan that I just presented.
Thanks very much for the report. Councillor Sanford, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Ms. DeSoto, for your presentation. Do you have any idea where that economic development department will be located in the towns?
Yes, we are currently thinking across the street in the newly formed sort of boardroom area in the space that CBT had once previously occupied, which is also adjacent to the Arts and Events Department.
So it'll be a nice, easy downtown access location?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you.
Speaking from first-hand experience, that's a really hot space. I mean, warm hot.
Oh.
And no windows. Councillor Comfort.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. I have a question about when you're describing the core functions of that department. The fourth bullet says support the Arts and Events Department in the delivery of cultural and artistic programming, but when you spoke to it, you called that strategic. And I'm just a little concerned that that's a pretty busy department when they get busy, and I'd be worried about somebody getting down in the weeds at that with actual practical tasks. So what would their relationship be with arts and events?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. I think every manager at the town of Canmore has to balance, you know, how they lead strategically without getting into the weeds and micromanaging. So the intent of an economic development officer would help to guide the strategic delivery of arts and events in generally, but not specifically in the day-to-day tasks of their work. There's clearly an effective operation there. You know, having an arts and events department is somewhat unique to the town of Canmore. Many municipalities don't have that kind of service delivery. We are an event town, and not only the events we produce ourselves, but also third-party event producers who need to liaise with the town for support services, waste removal, street clearing, road closures. All of that work, you know, is clearly done by the events department, but also many event organizers stand up here in front of council and the community and say that their event is an economic development driver. So the idea would be for the economic development officer to help strategically lead those kinds of discussions and when events should be produced, how they could be done to help maximize the economic development potential.
Okay, thank you.
Just following up on that line of thought, I mean, council can't direct you on how to shape your administration structure. I have some, not concerns, but I'm not immediately convinced that the arts particularly fit under economic development. There's clearly a connection. Events are more clear a connection to economic development. But I share, I think, some of the concerns that Councillor Comfort was voicing. And having been in the arts sector all my life, I've never liked having the arts sector presented as a draw for tourists or something. We're independent of tourism. But anyways, it's always felt like that the arts department particularly is a, what's the word, kind of a lone wolf. I mean, it's always being pushed around and tried under this department and under that department, and for one reason or another it hasn't worked, so maybe it'll work under economic development. But on a more specific question, how do you see the timeline folding out for the hiring of particularly the support staff? I mean, that's not going to happen immediately, obviously.
No, so if approved tonight, we would, there's already a job description that's been drafted. We could post right away, which would
for the EDO.
For the EDO position. So that would likely see us, you know, interviewing towards the end of January into February. And then, you know, likely having a person start in March sometime.
And then that person would become comfortable in the position and then start to plan for support staff?
Well, yes, that would be up to the GM of Municipal Services to work with that individual to establish what skills and resources are needed and what we should recruit for, because there hasn't been a job description drafted for that second position.
Just thinking in regards to the next agenda item, budget, and the plan for slippage in salary, wages and benefits. I guess we'll find quite a bit of slippage on that budget.
Yeah, now with this budget, I would suggest, because it's being funded by business licensing revenue, and that revenue is collected specifically for the purpose of economic development services, that any slippage from this department would go into the economic development reserve. So it would not, yeah. Sure,
that would make sense. Councillor Seeley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Soto. I'm excited about the possibility of having an in-house EDO. I think it's long overdue, but I have similar concerns, and mine are more about special events. It's pretty unique to Canmore, and I'd be concerned about an economic development officer being sucked into special events and not doing the economic activities that we needed. So I'm hoping it could be a part of our strategic planning, and I'm thinking it'll probably go there, just to think very carefully of that and make sure that we have clear initiatives, preparing strategic plans, and carrying out economic activities of the town. So that would be part of the strat planning, I'm thinking.
I'm not sure that we would have much to present more than, you know, if we have a new EDO hired by, well, the strategic planning that we currently have scheduled is in January. So we will, the intent is to go out and recruit for that EDO position through the month of January and into February.
So I guess my question would be, when we take a look at, there's a lot of really good information in here. Would there be an opportunity to fine tune it just to make sure that we approach it?
If it's intended to influence who we hire or the role in which we're hiring, I would say we'd be already out there doing that. One thing to keep in mind is that a project that's currently in the 2018 budget is an organizational structure review. We have grown organically over the years, and you know, some of the reporting lines, I'll just use an example for having our IT department, for example, report through to finance. We actually see that in other municipalities around, because the first large software program developed for municipalities was typically in the finance department, so then they tended to have their own IT department. But we've heard recently through an IT review that, you know, we need some greater strategic direction for that department. So it's likely that that department will be reevaluated in our organizational structure through that process. And it could be that the economic development department is reevaluated as well as far as reporting structures. But as far as deliverables, as we get into strategic planning, and there's specific deliverables that council wants to see in 2019, 2020, and there's budget impacts associated with them, just like any other department, the new economic development officer would take that strategic direction from council and then build a budget and business plan to respond to that strategic direction. So if there's new initiatives or whatever that council wants to be followed up on, we can have that discussion at strategic planning for certain. Yeah.
Okay.
Dr. Cottle, you had something?
Well, Ms. DeSoto just went there. I was going to say, if you look at the 2018 priorities for this position, which is a manager position, one of the things is to develop a 1 to 3 year budget and business plan. So that's the kind of thing, as she just said, that would come to council, right? To your question, Councillor Seeley, about what the priorities will be and how we fine tune it. And just on events, you know, currently arts and events reports through to me, and similar to the way IT reports to finance, it's awkward organizationally to have a supervisor report to a general manager. Not about the people, just about the organizational structure. So having arts and events report through to a manager, for me, we need to also look at that in the organizational review, because right now it relies on individuals remembering to inform other individuals about a lot of things instead of a structure that works regardless of the people who are in it. So I am not involved in special events. I do not have my fingers in event management. That department is well managed and they do a great job. So I see this economic development manager really just taking on the advisory and support work that I do, but not the delivery and not in the details.
That's reassuring. Thank you. I had another question here. Oh, in the job description or the core functions, you know that under supporting business retention expansion, one of the bullets is providing mentoring and support for new startups and businesses wishing to grow. And you've noted in your report that RMV, Rocky Mountain Ventures, is doing that work. And I think it's a safe assumption to imagine that the EDO would be working directly with an RMV to assist in the work that they've initiated rather than take it over, or?
Yes, absolutely. We, want to make sure we're not duplicating services. Rocky Mountain Ventures, they have a niche for certain. They provide business coaching. They provide mentorship and pitch support, they call it. So when a new company needs to pitch their idea to funders or whatever, they have mentors on board that will assist with that. They are technology focused, so
Not entirely.
Not entirely. They've expanded. Yes, I think if people need pitches, but they do not provide the full gamut of new business support. So when you look at what, they wouldn't help them find, available space, for example. They wouldn't, potentially work with landlords, etc. They wouldn't help them navigate zoning bylaws. That kind of thing. Right.
Yep. No, that's good, as long as we're working with established groups.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And in your verbal presentation, I might have misunderstood something, but did you refer to the new tourism office in TCK?
I referred to it as TCK, yes.
But you said tourism office. Do they have a tourism office?
I meant organization. If I said office, I
okay.
misspoke.
I misheard, maybe.
Yeah, yep. So there was some discussion as to how CBT might formulate themselves. There was an organizational structure left behind when CBT dissolved, and I believe it's Councillor Seeley that sits on that board. So they have specifically, again, narrowed their mandate and are specifically just looking at tourism marketing initiatives, from what I understand. But yeah,
it was more the question of whether there was a physical office or not that I was curious about, but no. I haven't heard anything about that.
I haven't either.
Would make sense if they did do that, but regards to your comment on the analysis of the alternative, I would agree with the administration. This town has to be doing economic development now, regardless of whether or not there's an Olympic bid. And so I'm happy to see us moving forward with this. I don't have any other questions. Are there questions from other members of council? Seeing none, thanks for your report.
Thank you.
That I will move that. With that, I will move that council approve the establishment of an in-house economic development department in accordance with the department budget and business plan as presented. And I'll speak strongly in support of this motion. I think it's, well, I've been advocating for bringing economic development in-house myself for some time. I sat before I was re-elected in 2010 on the citizen-based community that designed the Sustainable Economic Development Tourism Strategy. And there's a whole number of suggestions within that strategy that were never really acted on, for the most reason because there wasn't adequate budget or dedicated staff, and I could see an in-house EDO taking direction from the CAO, doing more focused work on a number of those other possibilities. So I'm really happy to support this motion. Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. I too will be supporting this motion. I think that it's no secret that I haven't been super keen on trying to encourage economic development in Canmore just because we were having a hard time housing and accommodating the people already in our community, and so asking more people to come seemed a bit counterintuitive. However, I do realize that regardless of whether there's a 2026 Olympic bid, we do need to focus on economic development as well as, more importantly, quite frankly, diversification. And so I really see this role speaking to those issues and wants within our business community. It was no secret that I was gun shy of encouraging more business. But again, I like to state clearly that I'm very much in support of this position, and I look forward to seeing this department grow and look forward to seeing the fruits of their labor.
Other comments, discussion from members of council on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Okay, send out that request. Send out that information. That was it.
Book it down.
Yeah. Hire somebody. Moving now to agenda item G2, 2018 budget amendments. Ms. Van Kijn-Pima.
Good evening, Your Worship, members of council. I've been waiting since November 9th when we first started talking about these budget amendments, and as threatened or promised, I'm before you December 19th meeting to do the formal consideration of the amendments and to look for you to provide approval for 4 different recommendations. If it's acceptable to council, rather than doing the whole presentation and then trying to go to the recommendations, I think it lends itself quite nicely to splitting them up. So I'll talk to you about the stuff that relates to recommendation 1, and then you can have a discussion, I'll answer questions and make a decision, and then we can move on to recommendation 2, do the same thing, and then 3 and 4 I think go together. Is that acceptable to Mayor and Council?
Yeah.
Pardon me. So those are the 4 recommendations. I'll come back to them one at a time. And they're the same as that you will find in your written staff report. So the first one to deal with is 2017 capital projects to cancel. So according to Council's budget amendments policy, that's Finance 001, if there's certain steps that haven't been taken. So if a project hasn't been started in a year, or it hasn't been entered into a contract or sent it out for tender or anything like that, it actually doesn't get to automatically carry forward. So that's Section 8 of that policy. So there are a number of projects that didn't get started, and actually the number is 10. And so what we need to do is we actually have to get council's approval to cancel a project. And that doesn't mean that they're all canceled and gone and not going to happen. Okay? It just means that according to the policy, we have to do it this way. So what have we got? So they're on the list that's in your report. There's 2 projects that we're recommending be canceled and not come back. And those 2 are the electronic records for accounts payable processing. And the reason why administration is not recommending that it come back at this time, if you will recall, we do have a capital project for electronic records document management system. And that solution, we anticipate, may have a very close tie-in with that accounts payable electronic stuff. So we'd hate to sort of put the cart before the horse. So it just seems to make more sense to get the solution for the records in general, and then if something else is needed for accounts payable, to bring it back at that time. And the other project is the OSTP Douglas Fir project, and we struggled to get approvals, and so this project wasn't able to get started. It's not looking promising to be able to do that project in 2018, so that's why we're recommending that it be canceled and not come back. So those are the 2. They're X'd and you're not going to see again in the near future that we know of. Then the vast majority of them are actually projects that, according to policy, are canceled. They don't meet the requirements for an automatic carry forward, but we have included them in tonight's 2018 budget amendment proposals, and those are 6 projects. And they were delayed for various reasons depending on the project. Most of it relates to projects on the old daycare lands. Delays in getting started and everything else. We weren't able to get started on the work on those projects, but I want to assure council as well as the residents of the town of Canmore that those projects are back in and the budget amendments proposed this evening. And then there's 2 projects that we're looking to cancel 2017, and we were going to bring one back when we deal with the 2019 budget process, and one as part of a 2020 budget process, whatever that looks like. Preliminary cost investigations have indicated that the budget in the 2017 budget was insufficient to do the project, and there's increased cost for Lift Station 2 and wastewater treatment plant upgrades. And so there's also, because of those increased costs for those projects, the manager of Public Works was looking for opportunities to maybe postpone some other projects that sort of had the same funding source. So that also fed into why we're recommending that they not come back in 18, but to maybe push them out a year or 2. So that's a bit of the explanation as to why we're looking for the cancellation of those projects. So, recommendation relating to that is that council direct administration to cancel capital projects. Yeah, I won't read all the numbers because Mayor Borman gets to do that. And at this point, I'd welcome any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, and appreciate splitting this up into the sections you suggest. It will be simpler. So just sort of idle curiosity, I suppose. So we have a policy that says these projects have to be canceled, but then it requires a motion to council. And what would happen if, for whatever reason, council didn't approve the motion to cancel a specific project?
Would then I be looking for council to actually give direction to administration to specifically not cancel them and to carry them forward? So council does have the ability.
Is that stated in the bylaw that if council doesn't cancel the project, then it has to dedicate it to the following year? Or?
Yeah, I have it here. I can look up the exact wording, but if my memory is serving me correctly, I believe the idea behind it is that you don't automatically get to carry it forward, and it now becomes council's decision. Council can decide to bring it up as part of the considerations for the following year's budget, or they can choose to cancel it. So it comes out of administration's purview. So capital projects not qualifying for carry forward shall be either one, resubmitted and evaluated by council as part of upcoming capital budget considerations, or two, submitted to council for direction to cancel the project. So one could construe this as if council chooses not to cancel the project, that you'd choose one instead. Otherwise, we're in limbo.
Okay. I don't imagine that happening, but it's curious.
One never knows.
One of those loop things. We had a discussion at Agenda Review that I'll initiate here as well for the sake of the other councillors and all of the public here. So how will the cancelled projects that were numbered under the 1700 system be tracked for future reference? So we're not using those numbers anymore. So if in a few years somebody's looking back at project 1723, how do they know that it was cancelled and reapproved under a different number?
Yeah, so for the purposes of ones that had another number, so those 6, right, that we're canceling and proposing to bring back in 18, as part of the staff report, I did provide the old number and then the new number. The continuity would also be the name of the project. And whenever we have a capital budget, there's the summary sheet that gives you the outline of all of the projects in that year, gives you the project number, as well as the dollar amount and then the funding source. So in absence of a different system, one could go by the name of the project.
So I'll often look back at old budgets for whatever reason and go through the capital project list, and so pretend it's 3 years from now, I'm going back to 2017 and I'm looking for project 1723. I'll see it in the budget, but will I see that it's been either cancelled or dealt with in a different way?
Yeah, so right now, unfortunately, in the absence of an electronic records document management system, the way the documents are posted on our website and available to the public is by when it was brought to council or committee of the whole or finance committee for consideration. And so right now things are filed by event where it was considered. And so there isn't a real easy way to sort of follow the bouncing ball on any one particular topic, be that a capital project or organics recycling discussions. You'd have to sort of look at each meeting, and it wouldn't be easy to be able to just say, call me up all the documents relating to capital project 1723. Hopefully Ms. Hyde will correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that part of the changeover to electronic records management system is it will increase our ability to do such as that, to put in a search and then have all those documents come up. So I know that that's a promise for the future rather than an answer to your question for right now.
Great, it's the best answer there is, I guess.
Yeah.
And in similar vein, so now we're numbering capital projects with the 7,000 number. How will that change year to year? Would it?
We'll just keep going. So if we ended at 7050, we'd start at 7051.
Oh. Okay. So it was always nice in the past. You knew what year that project was from because the project number started with that, and we won't be able to differentiate as to the year by the budget number or project number anymore.
Yeah, so we can really think about how is it that we put our documents together or present it to the Finance Committee and Council to aid some of that continuity, for sure. We don't have to just change one way and not change anything else.
Okay. Are there any other questions from members of council for this first part of the report? Seeing none. have other questions that relate to some of the projects, but I can get to them when we actually go through the capital projects. So if there's no other questions on this specific part of the agenda, I'll move that council direct administration to cancel capital projects number 1606, 1723, 1724, 1726, 1728, 1740, 1745, 1748, 1756, and 1760. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to presenting information for your consideration when you're considering the second recommendation for this evening. So managers and affiliates were asked to provide any 2018 budget amendments that they'd like for consideration. And so then administration reviewed all of those proposed amendments with a set of parameters in mind. We thought it would be important to make sure we were really clear on how we were going to decide what we thought merited bringing forward and what administration thought did not. So I wanted to share with you, I know you've seen this as part of the Finance Committee, but I just want to remind you, because I know you have lots of things going on between then and now. So there were a number of operating parameters. So we were looking for something to be extraordinary, not, oh geez, you know, I think the cost of pencils is going to be up, so I'll need another $30, or, you know, we were looking for actually significant changes. And so anything that's minor or immaterial was excluded. And if it was a matter of shifting between lines, so for example, in my finance budget, maybe I have X amount of dollars in contracted services and an amount in professional services. Those are two different line items, and I thought, well, no, I need more in professional services and I'll do less in contracted services. That's shifting between lines. It's still the same dollar amount within that department, so we excluded those types of requests. Anything that was a potential but really unknown, we excluded. And one really good example, and I know Mr. Hannes, our manager of facilities, did a bunch of work, and he's been thinking about what are the impacts with the rec center renovation. And so there would be a decrease in revenue, but there probably be some decrease in staffing costs, but there might be some increases somewhere else. And so trying to project what that might be, who knows when and what the impact will be. And so among the senior management team, when we were applying these parameters, we thought it probably would be more beneficial to report it when we do our quarterly reporting on the financials, to just report that as a variance for council, rather than us trying to anticipate what that might be. So those types of things we didn't include in budget amendments. And anything that was reoccurring. So one example, and it's in one of the proposed changes, is licensing fees for a number of software programs have either increased or we have new ones because we have new software. That's going to keep being that much or more going into the future.
They never decreased?
Darn no. And so we thought, well, it was important. You need to include that, because otherwise you're just going to have to do that and more as a consideration for the following year, and on and on. So those were included in the ones we brought forward. And then items that were decided on during the original budget process, so the 2018 budget process, if council and the Finance Committee and then council had already considered those requests and made the decision at that time, we didn't bring them back again, because we felt council had already made their decision on those requests. So that kind of gives you an idea what the lens administration put on their own requests before we brought it forward for consideration. So with that in mind, where did we end up with operating amendments? We brought 20 amendments to the Finance Committee for consideration. There was a total of 58 proposed, so we whittled it down. And then after we had met with the Finance Committee on November the 9th, there was actually one more project that was brought in that you hadn't heard as being sitting as the Finance Committee. So all of the adjustments work out to a net zero. So there's a net zero impact. The total amount of revenue remains the same. The total amount of operating expenditures remains the same. So we're not asking for an increase in taxation. We're not asking for an overall increase in budget. We've been able to manage the ins and outs and ups and downs and all arounds, so we end up with a net zero impact. So the adjustment that you didn't see as part of the Finance Committee, but it was brought up sort of as a quick topic of discussion, was where are we with growth in the community, and growth as it relates to assessment, and then assessment as it relates to how much taxes we're anticipating to collect from new properties rather than just increased values of existing properties. And so I had a conversation with our assessor to determine what we thought it was going to be. And so what we've done is we've increased taxes, anticipated taxes from growth by $50,000 or by 50%. So we've gone from $100,000 to $150,000. But the recommendation is, as we learned in 2008, growth isn't always sustainable, which means from year to year, you can't necessarily always count on there being taxes from growth. But we also know there are going to be some expenditures coming down the line, operating expenditures that we might have an inkling, but we don't know exactly what it is. So the recommendation of administration is, rather than taking the 50 and lowering the tax requirement, is to put that into the general operating reserve, and then that can be used to help offset future operating costs. So that's why it still has a net zero effect, if you follow our recommendations. Something I also wanted to bring to your attention, and I know I heard little mumblings, not grumblings, but mumblings from the Gender Review Committee about the pluses and the minuses in the chart that I had put in the staff report. And if one gets into pure accounting, you could view a revenue as a minus and an expense as a plus, or it depends on how your mind works. You might see it the other way around. And then I thought, so then would an increase in a plus be a plus, or would a decrease in a minus be a plus? Two negatives are a positive? Anyway, I thought that would just be way too confusing. So the premise behind the chart in the staff report is, if it's a plus, it means an increase, regardless of whether it's a revenue or an expense. If it's a minus, it's a decrease, whether it's a revenue or an expense. Guess I should have provided that information when you were reading it the first time around. For that, I apologize. Now I see the light. So one thing I did want to explain to you is attached to the staff report is attachment number 1. And what that is includes an amended summary of the operating budget. So the first page in your budget and business plan, it gives you sort of the summary of all the units. So I just redid it. If you were to approve all of the proposed amendments, what would that look like? And then also included in attachment 1 are narratives providing more details on the subsequent pages for all of the proposed amendments. When we met as the Finance Committee, we didn't have that narrative, so I'm hoping Council found that a little more helpful than what you had before. We're relying more on my verbal presentation. The last column also I wanted to bring to your attention on page 1. It gives you a bunch of numbers. Those numbers actually correspond to the numbers of the narratives, so you can see what lines in that number document that each of those narratives impact. And the last 3 narratives, so it was important when we redid the chart, it was like, oh, so this is what it looks like now. But in that is not just the amendments we're considering this evening, but there were 3 amendments that were considered by Council during 2017 that have modified the 18 budget. So in order to truly understand how do we get to the new numbers, I provided a narrative about the 3 items that Council had already made a decision on. And just to confuse you. No. All right, so the operating changes, and I presented it this way to the Finance Committee. I'm hoping now that I've warned you a little bit and changed the report so it is grouped sort of by categories of what the amendments are all about. I'll present it the same way this evening. So there's a group of adjustments that relate to transit. So we're looking at a regional transit. There's a $20,000 decrease in the requisition due to revised admin cost share formula. These numbers are coming from Bow Valley Regional Transit Commission, and so the numbers they provided us for the budget was a decrease of $20,000 from what they would need for regional. Unfortunately for local, it's not. It actually goes in the opposite direction. They're looking for a $149,000 increase. Current ridership trends are lower than was originally estimated, as well as there's increased maintenance and insurance costs that feed into that. So when they recrunch the numbers for 2018, that's what they're looking for a budget, is $149,000 more than what they were originally asking for or anticipated they'd be asking for. We actually have an opportunity to decrease the budgeted costs for the maintenance of transit stops. So in 2017, our Streets and Roads Department was sort of tasked with go out and find a contractor to do the work, to clear it. All of the responses to our request for proposals or tenders came in over budget. That prompted the Streets and Roads Department to take a look to figure out how many hours it would take to do that in-house, and found out that it would be significantly less cost if we brought it in-house. Therefore, there's an opportunity if we do that to save $21,000 and decrease the budget for that by that amount. And then last but not least, if council will recall, there was an initiative to get transit running people from Calgary out into the Bow Valley called the On It bus system. We kind of did an approval for our share of the operating costs for 2017, and we're being proactive because we now know that that bus service will happen again next busy tour season in the summer, and we're anticipating that our share of the operating costs would be $17,500. Yes.
Just on that, I know that our ultimate cost wasn't that much. We budgeted that.
Right.
Do you or Mr. Irwin have the detail on what it ended up actually costing town of Canmore?
Help.
Mr. Irwin does, I know.
$6,500.
I knew he had the number because I talked with him earlier. Yeah, so...
and that wasn't for a full season. Yeah.
And it's only weekend service, but council will recall that the budget we approved last year and again this year would be the cost of the town if there was zero ridership. Mm-hmm. And the experience in 2017 was quite positive. Mr. Farr?
So the only point I would add to that is, although the actual cost to us last year was lower than what we had budgeted, so $6,500 opposed to $17,500, we're taking the same approach this year of budgeting higher. Also because last year it was rolled out very late with very little advertising, and the service itself was in need of further refinement. So we are anticipating that this year, with a longer lead time, that there will be service changes to it that may result in some additional costs, but will also result in additional ridership. So just to ensure that we have sufficient space to compensate for both, we are taking the same approach.
Good idea. I guess just for heads up, council, this transit service is operated by Calgary Regional Partnership, which is about to morph into a growth management board. So who knows what it'll look like? Things could change.
So that's the transit-related bucket. The next bucket that I sort of put things into was the third-party revenue. So these are opportunities for increased revenue amounts. The first one is during 2017, the fire service agreement with the MD of Bighorn was up for renewal. So the new contract provides for MD's contribution to the fire service agreement of an increase of $17,500. So we'd like to include that change in 2018 to reflect the contract agreement. As well, ATCO and the next one, Fortis, they both have franchise fees that they pass along to the town of Canmore. 2017 saw those franchise fees trending larger than what was originally anticipated. And then ATCO and Fortis do their crunching and provided a projection for 2018. And both of them had projected that that trend in higher franchise fees would continue. So we're looking at increasing the budget for $180,000 for the ATCO franchise fees and $135,000 for the Fortis franchise fees. And that comes directly from ATCO and Fortis. Just to remind council though, the ATCO franchise fees go towards general operating costs, but the Fortis franchise fees we do transfer into now the asset rehabilitation and repair reserve. And so that's why with Fortis, the $135,000 actually has a net zero effect on the budget because it also is a corresponding transfer to reserve. That's not the case with ATCO. And then the last sort of third-party revenue is engineering permitting revenue increase. So it's been busier with engineering permits for roads. So we're looking at increasing that by $25,000. However, there's professional fees that sort of come with that, as well as the work that's involved with this increased level of development in town. And so the engineering department is proposing to use that $25,000 to offset an increase that they need in professional fees. So this adjustment would have a net zero effect on the bottom line.
Question.
Yeah.
Under that section, the Fortis franchise fees, can you remind me of the history of why it is that we direct those fees to reserve?
I wasn't here and I don't recall off the top of my head, so I will eventually turn to my left.
I'll save you the...
But logic would dictate that it was felt that because we're charging this on people's electricity bills, that it really should be earmarked to help the town pay for its infrastructure. And I believe that's probably the motivation behind it, but now I'm going to go my left.
Yeah. My recollection is it started when we buried the downtown lights, right?
Yeah, yes, that's my recollection as well. We started transferring that to reserve to fund the debenture to do the capital project to bury the downtown power lines.
Is that debenture paid out yet, do you know?
I do not know.
Pardon me? One more year. So at that point, we may reconsider where we direct those fees, arguably.
May I remind council about my presentation on reserves and long-term financial strategy?
I'm just saying we may reconsider. I didn't say we would. Councillor Sanford?
Thank you, Worship. Thank you, Ms. Van Kampima, for that presentation. I just wanted to follow up with the ATCO with that revenue increase. Where is that 180,000 going? It's not going into reserves.
No, it's a form of revenue that helps to pay. It's a non-tax source of funding for our operating expenditures.
And has that already been calculated into the budget
Yes.
previously? So
Yes.
essentially that's not net zero, but it doesn't impact anything because we already have that calculation.
Well, so we had a number in the budget, right? And so now we're saying, oh, it's going to be 180,000 more.
Oh,
so that's helping to offset the impact of some of the other amendments that are going to cost us more.
Oh, I see. So,
and that's how we came to net zero, because ATCO helped pay for that.
So ultimately it's net zero, but this is a revenue increase.
Yes.
That's bringing us to the same place with the other amendments we're making to the budget.
Right. So if we didn't have the $180,000 increase, then we'd have to find another source to fund $180,000 of budget amendments.
Okay. Or it wouldn't be net zero then, because there would be an increase in the budget.
Correct.
Request.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, next bucket. Rogers Hometown Hockey. So Rogers Hometown Hockey is coming to hometown Canmore, February 10th and the 11th. And while Rogers picks up the vast majority of the costs to put that production on, there are some items that aren't covered by them. And so we're looking at a two-pronged approach to $7,600. So the overall cost to the town of Canmore, we need $7,600. We can accomplish $5,000 of it by reducing some things that are in the Winter Carnival budget right now. So the things that the reduction in the Winter Carnival would cover, we needed $2,000 for overnight security. So they set up and then they leave it there. They need somebody to be on site to make sure that nothing happens to the equipment. There's an operations coordinator. So the total cost of the operations coordinator would be $3,600. We can fund $2,000 of that by reductions in the Winter Carnival budget. And we need $1,000 for porta potties. So that can be covered off by a $5,000 reduction in the Winter Carnival budget, or the things they're doing for the Winter Carnival. And then we need $2,600 as a budget amendment, and that would cover off $1,000 for first aid provision and the other $1,600 for the operations coordinator. There are a number of winter carnival service decreases, so it's not that we're decreasing the winter carnival's budget. What we're doing is we're keeping the budget the same and taking $5,000 worth of activities off, which also makes sense from a workload perspective, because Rogers Hometown Hockey will put some workload onto our arts and events department right during the winter carnival. And so it's our position that they don't have the capacity to just add, and it would be better if they could take some away. I believe in the narrative it provides you with the details on what would be the items that wouldn't continue in the winter carnival. The other thing that we didn't factor in, and again, this is sort of falls under the parameter of the unknown. It could, but it might not, so we didn't include it. And that is, if we get a bunch of snow, February 10th, or 9th, 10th, and 11th, we might need some extra snow removal, but we don't know. It depends on Mother Nature. So we haven't included any money or consideration for that, but just a heads up, we may end up reporting it as a variance to the snow removal budget if we have to do a bunch of snow removal for Rogers Hometown Hockey, because it would be at a higher level than we normally would do if we had a snow event in town.
So essentially, we're reducing the delivery model for the carnival, winter carnival.
Yes.
But it's anticipated that what the hometown hockey thing brings would compensate for what we aren't doing ourselves.
Right, like it's a different set of activities than what was originally planned for winter carnival, and not necessarily less time spent with activities, just different activity. Yeah. All right, I'll move on to the next bucket then. So the next one is contracted services. And so there are a number of projects or amendments that we're looking, or not projects, that's capital. We're looking at operating amendments for some items under contracted services. So with the changeover of the software at the rec center, we process credit cards slightly different using a different system. So therefore there's a opportunity to reduce our credit card processing fees by $10,000. As well, when we were putting together the 2017 and 18 budget, we had just started in getting bids for the custodial contracts. Since that time, we now have a contract. We know what the amount is, so there's an opportunity to reduce the amount that we need for custodial services by $15,000. Then there's a Plime event, and yes, a Plime event is a real thing. And what it is, it's an exhaust system that takes bad air out. There's actually Art Place has it in their materials shop, and the fire department has it in where they start up their equipment, and it exhausts carbon monoxide. However, there isn't sufficient Plime venting in the fire hall, so we're looking for an increase of $10,000 to rectify that situation so that we don't carbon monoxide our firefighters. The roundhouse kitchen counter replacement. We talked about this as part of the finance committee. We had a laminate. It's broken down quicker than we had anticipated. It's actually a health and safety issue. The inspector came in and said, you can't be doing that. So we'd like to replace it with a stainless steel variety, which we anticipate will last longer and have less chance of being a harborer of bacteria. The software maintenance license, well, this is one I sort of said, we've got more costs, it's going to reoccur, so it's a bunch of licenses. I think it's 5 or 6 different increases for various licenses, so that totals $22,500. Legal fees, surprise, surprise, are higher than we had budgeted. We budgeted $75,000 for 2018, and we're asking council to consider doubling that budget by 75 to 150. At the time of the finance committee meeting in November, we'd spent $120,000 on legal fees, and I know it's higher than that because I've been signing checks. And I'm sure there's more bills to come. And then there is the EIS. So, environmental impact, sustainability statement, thank you. In the planning department, we need to do that. We had talked about that before. The planning is going to need $40,000 more for that type of work in 2018. But what we're proposing is the need for that work is coming out of the volume of development that's happening in 2017, all the applications, and we're collecting the funds or the fees for that in 17. So administration will be looking for council when we consider what to do with the surplus, is to consider taking at least $40,000 of the planning revenue, putting it into the general operating reserve, and then that will be used to fund this increase in 2018. So it's a net zero impact, but we need permission to increase that. Any questions on that stuff?
Just one. So, custodial contract, do we just have one contract for all of our facilities? Mr. Fark?
Yes, we have one contract. So we manage our facilities in two ways. We have one contract for all of our facilities. In addition, we actually have some town staff who do some custodial work. So the workload is shared between a small number of town employees, and the majority of the work is done by the contractor.
We used to sign contracts that were facility oriented, wasn't it? Like one contract on EP and a different contract on, no? Okay. Councillor Comfort, you have a question?
Yes, I'm just wondering with the EIS reviews, it's under operating, but those are generally associated with capital projects, aren't they?
They might be someone else's capital project, but they're not our capital project. So
okay.
They're the work of the planning department. It's their daily work.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why it's operating.
Thank you.
Okay?
Yep.
I'll move on to the next bucket. Staffing and growth. So, the first one is to clarify, based on the questions we got at the Finance Committee, is to revert a contract engineering position back to an employee position. At the time, we weren't successful in filling a position as an employee. A former employee, Mr. Blair Birch, agreed to come back on a contract basis, so he's been doing his work for us on a contract basis. He has put his foot down and said, for the second time and final time, he's retiring at the end of 2017.
Oh, he's way too young to retire.
Well, that's what I thought, but he, so we need to still fill that position, so we'd like to give it a shot as an employee, because it is a continuing position. It's always going to be needed. It's not a temporary thing, which is something that lends itself better to a contract position, whereas if it's going to be an ongoing and continuous position, it's better filled as an employee position. So that's our recommendation. The cost of Mr. Birch is $110,000 a year, and we're anticipating the cost for it to be an employee to be $110,000 a year for a net zero impact. The next item under staffing and growth is the Affordable Services Program. It's been quite successful. It's also had an impact on other services. It's bringing more people in who hadn't previously been seeking the services of FCSS and Bow Valley Parent Link. So right now, we have a position that is part-time, and the other staff members are filling in for the rest of the time. We are seeking permission to increase that to a full-time or a 1.0 full-time equivalent. And actually, add an attachment number 2 in your package, I believe should provide you with more information on why it is felt that that is a necessary amendment for 2018.
So, just on that one.
Yes.
In the report, attachment 2, it notes that the 0.6 is funded under FCSS, so it's 80% funded by the province. Mm-hmm. Would that split continue to the full-time position? I'm
going to ask Dr. Cottle to respond.
No, so the 3 days a week would be funded at 80-20. The 2 days a week would be 100% Town of Canmore. So those 2 days a week are considered not FCSS work, but community social development work, which is a department that is wholly funded by the Town of Canmore.
That's what I assumed, but thank you. Okay. Councillor Sanford, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. When we go from a part-time position to a full-time position, are we factoring in the benefits and
yes,
all the things that the Town of Canmore pays for?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Because we're doing that with snow clearing as well, and so that's all factored into the...
Yeah, so snow clearing, you mean for the transit stops? Yeah, for sure.
That's going from a contract position to a full-time, part-time to full-time?
Yeah, it was a seasonal position to an all years position, right. Yeah.
So each time you give us that number, that's including the...
That's all in.
The benefit portions. Okay,
yes.
Good, thank you.
Okay. moving on to the next one is land use enforcement. So this is another one of those, planning's been busier, and people have been busier, and people have been not necessarily following the planning rules. And so during 2017, we brought on a person to do land use enforcement. We believe that there's still work to do. And so what administration would like to see is extend that. So right now it's a contract position. We'd like to extend that contract for throughout 2018, and that would require a change of $75,000. However, we believe that we should be funding that from the operating reserve because it's from planning fees. So likely when we talk about the surplus, we'd be looking to transfer planning surplus into the operating reserve, which we would then pull out to fund this position in 2018. And then slippage. So this is the one that we talked sort of briefly about. Each year, as you know, Mayor Borman, you were just saying, you know, are you going to hire the person right January 1st for the economic development? No, you're not. So there might be a period of time. And so we never know which positions or for how long. And so what we do when in the departments under salaries, wages, and benefits, we calculate as if we'll have those positions filled by the incumbents at their cost for the whole year. But we know that changes. So what we do is we budget an amount for slippage. So if you will recall at our last variance reporting, we had been trending higher than what we budgeted for slippage. And so it was really important to administration to be able to bring to council for consideration a net zero budget increase with all of these changes. So we feel confident that we can increase the slippage by $48,000, which helped sort of make up so we could still get to a net zero. And that we believe is doable given the trends that we've been seeing this year in the amount of slippage. And then this is that new one I talked to you about. I went back to the assessor, found out how much per growth. So putting in $50,000, but I would like to recommend that that be transferred to the operating reserve. And so attachment number 3 provides you an updated FTE count before the economic development department changes. So attachment 3, I believe, talks to 204.3 FTEs with the addition of 2 more. I know in my report it said 1.5, but somebody changed their number of people after I put my report and I didn't catch that, so I apologize for the confusion. So it is 2.0 FTE positions. So that would bring the count up to 206.3. I did want to point out or remind council that just because it says 206.3 FTE doesn't mean that there's 206 full-time employees working for the town of Canmore. What that means is a combination of our full-time, part-time, casual, seasonal, all added together means the equivalent amount of time that 206 full-time employees would spend providing the services to the town of Canmore. That's what that means. It doesn't mean we have 206 full-time employees. Something else to be aware of is with the changes that we're proposing, the proposed tax increase net of growth remains at 3.7% anticipated tax increase, which was the same as what was in the approved 2018 budget. But now with our increase of taxes from growth, the overall tax requirement has increased by 4.6%, but 150,000 of that's paid from growth. So our net increase in municipal taxes remains at 3.7. Just statistical information. All right, and then I talked to you about the next bucket is the ones I talked to you about that was previously approved by council, so that's in your narrative sheet, so that's the 3 of those. That concludes my presentation on that part of my staff report. I would certainly recommend or welcome any questions that you still have and didn't get answered.
I think I asked all my questions as you went along. But let me check. Councillor McCallum.
Wouldn't want to disappoint, Your Worship.
No.
I'd had a question way back when we were yakking at transit, and somebody didn't see my light go on. That's okay. I just wanted to know, I wanted to understand. What?
I say a polite cough sometimes works.
I knew I would have a chance at the end, so I wasn't that concerned. I am wasting time scrolling up to this part in my agenda. On it transit, so we've asked for 17,500. We're being asked for 17,500 to fund this service. At what point will we start budgeting what it's actually costing us? Because as we heard before, it actually cost us around $6,000. And I'm just curious, will it be after we've had the pilot, and this is probably refinement of the pilot this summer, which is a further pilot. Will it be at that point, once we see sort of several years in a row of performance, that we'll be able to actually ask for what we actually need to operate the service?
Certainly, you know, when you first start any service, it's always sort of a guessing game as to what you're going to need. And initial uptake and way you do things and the cost of that doesn't necessarily reflect what it's going to look like in the future, because especially during the initial year, you're going to refine. So that's why we wanted to continue with the original 17,500. I anticipate that for 2019 and onward, if the On-It bus is still going, at that time we would have a better idea of how it's going to be delivered, what the cost of that is, the ridership, and we'll be able to refine the budget way more.
And I get, because it's sort of an expense outside of the organization to a certain extent, it's about trusting and hedging bets appropriately, and we're basically asking more than what we need, but I just wanted to understand when we would actually start asking what we sort of need for it, and that would be further down the road.
You know, and just a reminder, we try to approach things conservatively, because the Municipal Government Act doesn't let us budget a deficit.
And I fully appreciate that. You know that I know that, so I just wanted to understand that. Thank you very kindly.
Councillor Comfort?
Yes, I also had a couple of questions that go way back to the beginning of your presentation, but they're just for my own information or for clarification. So you stated that it's regarding the operating budget amendments, and it's sort of in the introductory part of that, that which amendments would be recommended to the Finance Committee and then to the Council. Budget amendments should be extraordinary in nature, and when you address that in your oral presentation, it sort of slid into minor and immaterial adjustments. So can you give an example of something that would be considered an emergency request?
I mean extraordinary?
Extraordinary, sorry.
Yeah, so what we sort of meant by extraordinary was, could you have reasonably anticipated it and you just failed to do so? Or is it something that, so here's an example. At the time that we were preparing the 2017 and 18 multi-year budget, we had no idea what the fire service agreement was going to be with the MD of Bighorn. If the agreed upon contract had come in and it was a couple of $1,000s, that's immaterial, right? But it sort of was extraordinary. It wasn't something that we could reasonably anticipate ahead of time, and it was a material amount. So extraordinary and material kind of tie in together, if that makes any sense. Yeah.
And then and this is sort of related to that, the two items about, for instance, the potential and unknown financial impacts of any rec center shutdown were excluded, and then also amendments that would recur in future years. So do we allow for any contingency for those instances, or do we just wait until we know what those numbers are? Yeah,
so if there's something that's going to be reoccurring and we're fairly confident we know what that's going to be, they were included. So licensing changes with software. We excluded items such as the impact that a closure of the all or part or revolving sections of the recreation center. We're not sure when that would be. It depends on where they would be in the construction, at what point, as to what the impact would be of that. And so because that's such an unknown, and who knows what the impact would be, because there would be a decrease in revenue, but there would also be a decrease in costs, of operating costs. So there was such uncertainty around that we decided we wouldn't put it as a budget amendment, and we would just report it as a variance. We felt confident that we try not to over-collect taxes, but we also have to be cognizant of not being able to have a deficit. So we believe that if it turns out that it's going to cost us and we're not going to be able to come in on budget, then we'd come back to council and have a conversation and say, you know, now we have some actual numbers and here's the variance and this is the cause of it. And we'd be looking for you to approve a transfer from the operating reserve or some other source of revenue to be able to make up that shortfall so we didn't fall into a deficit.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That's very comprehensive. Thanks.
Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Worship. On that subject of collecting the taxation, when we are talking about an anticipated increase in growth of $150,000, but proposing to put the extra $50,000 into operating reserve, it just kind of feels like we're moving things from 2017 to 2018, and that we targeted a 3.7% increase. However, we've got an increase in growth. So are we looking at accomplishing more things in 2018 with the 3.7% increase in taxes, irrelevant to the fact that we have some growth revenue? So I guess what I'm thinking is that the growth revenue should actually be put towards towards reducing that target.
Yeah, and that's certainly council's prerogative.
So when we approved a 2-year budget, you know, we approved it with $100,000 in growth. Well, the growth is increased, so that part of it. But to put it into a reserve before we actually apply it to the tax increase that, you know, we approved 2 years ago without knowing that number, I think it would be more comfortable for me if we put that into the to reducing the tax rate, considering that we're going to have some reserves from 2017 that will be going into operating reserve. We're going to have surpluses from 2017. So it seems like we're getting ahead of ourselves both in the surpluses and in what we're collecting in growth.
So I can certainly appreciate that point. Something else that we did budget for was a $150,000 contingency, because with multi-year budgeting, there is uncertainty. And normally, what one would do when they multi-year budget is you would actually budget that as an expenditure rather than drawing it from a reserve to fund that contingency. But what we said is we just don't know what we're going to need because it's our first time with multi-year budgeting. So we had proposed that $150,000 come out of the operating reserve. So part of my thought process behind recommending we put the $50,000 from growth into the operating reserve is if we do go forward with multi-year budgeting in the future, then I would feel better about funding some of that contingency or making that recommendation to come out of the operating reserve, because knowing we had put sort of a growth in tax revenue opportunity into that operating reserve. So that was part of the thought process, but certainly at the end of the day, it's up to what council would like to do.
Yeah, and I mean, we approved a 3.7% increase, but all of the adjustments that have been made come out net zero, but ultimately we're still at a 3.7% tax increase. So it's not, you know, it's net zero to that target, but we didn't know what that target was going to be based on what our revenue sources were going to be and what our growth was going to be. So I personally would think it would be better for us to adjust our that tax rate.
I also, if I may, in our budget and business guidelines, when we first started out in the budgeting process, the recommendation was that administration not bring 2017 or 2018 budget with a tax increase of no more than 4.5. So we had worked to get it down to 3.7, but like I said, at the end of the day, whatever council decides, that's why we're here tonight.
We've made quite a few amendments, so that's all.
Yes, for sure.
Mr. Fark?
So just in addition to that, I would offer to council that council has also set reserve targets. So the amount of money that should be in reserves and including the operating reserve, and we are not yet reached that target. So the 50,000 allocation to the reserve would be taking us that much closer to the reserve targets as set by council.
And that's an established priority, or how did we word that around reaching the targets in our reserves?
That's one of council's strategic priorities in the current business plan?
So it is a priority to try to reach the reserve balances that we've identified. Right. Regardless, Councillor Stanford, of course, if when there's a motion, you can
for sure.
propose a change and take a moment to think about the proposed amendment if you like. Councillor McCallum.
I just had a question that sort of cherry picks off of Councillor Sanford's question, and it's a very interesting proposal. I was wondering, when we look back historically in terms of our taxation, specifically around the boom years prior to the recession, would it be safe to say that our taxes were left sort of suppressed unsustainably low as a result of applying growth in that particular fashion?
Yes.
And so is that perhaps a reason why, well, we've enjoyed quite low taxes for the services that we provide in our, or that we have in our municipality, but is that perhaps one of the reasons why we haven't been able to meet our reserve targets during the lean years was because we actually kept taxes unsustainably low?
Well, I have not done a specific analysis. Logic would dictate that that is the case. There wasn't really all that large changes to what the services were provided for, whether it was a boom year or a more of a quiet year or a bust. We didn't bust, but got slower.
No, it slowed.
So we didn't really make financial adjustments in that manner.
And so that's why, well, not why, I guess I'm just asking historically. I showed up in 2010, sort of halfway through the recession. I'm wondering, also, at that same time, our offsite levies, we were, sorry, not our offsite levies, our water and wastewater as well was part of the reason why we had to requisition $1 million in taxes through taxation to operate what was meant to be a self-sustaining model because we kept those rates unsustainably low.
Correct.
So part of what has gotten us into the position of making it a priority of making sure we have targets to our reserves is due to those practices in the late 2000s. Is that correct?
I would say that's correct.
Okay, thank you very much.
Ms. DeSoto?
Yes, thank you. Just one point of clarity, just speaking to Councillor McCallum's points. While we did keep taxes low through the decade you were talking about, it was more in relation to development fees that were not applied to reserves. So we were continually bringing in high levels of development revenues, and those revenues were used to keep taxes low, as opposed to growth in taxation.
May I?
Yep.
Through the chair. So just to continue off that idea is, so in this case, we're taking, it's being proposed by administration to take the part of the growth numbers, the increase in growth, as well as our development fees, the surpluses that we're seeing, and put those into reserves so that we don't repeat history. Would that be the philosophy? That's what I've understood.
Yes.
Through the last few years of financial management.
Yes, but again, just by way of clarity, my understanding of what Councillor Sanford was saying is that when you have growth revenue, you also have growth in costs. Like when your municipality grows, so growth in taxation, you know, theoretically should be used to, or can be used to support additional expenditures related to that growth, more roads to plow, more parks to mow, more, you know, whatever other service that the municipality provides. So that's the difference between, you know, the development revenues specifically and growth in taxation.
Right, but the prudence and the recommendation is to take the extra dollars in growth and put those into operating reserves.
The development fee dollars, yes. And in this instance, the recommendation from administration, because we have been recommending all along that there be specific increases to our reserve contributions annually. For 2018, we're proposing that $50,000 from growth in taxation that we didn't anticipate be used to do that, because
To
we
boost
do,
our
yeah,
savings.
we also have reserve targets, as has been pointed out, that have yet to be reached.
realized.
Yes.
All right,
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Councillor Comfort.
Thank you. I had a couple more questions that sort of go back. So one was about the debt for work on Stoneworks Creek from 2012. And we only spent a certain amount with an unspent balance of $245,000. Those funds being placed in the debt reserve, and we're going to take $215,000 of them to use for the mitigation construction project. So I'm just curious about the history of that.
Yeah.
Why was that delayed? And some of that was, didn't we get some provincial money for that? I just can't recall.
Yeah, so that's one of the capital amendments.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering if it would be
Oh.
amenable to Councillor Comfort if I answer that question when we deal with the capital?
Oh, okay, sorry.
No, that's okay.
That's fine then.
Okay.
I'll wait.
Right then, so back to the operating budget. Are there any other questions related to that part of the report? Did Councillor Sandberg, did you want to consider proposing an amendment to this motion that's on the overhead, which is what I'll put forward?
Well, the amendment would be to remove the growth-related income revenues from being put into reserves and used to lower the tax rate that was targeted at 3.7%. So whatever that differential would be, and essentially looking at this from what we do with our surpluses. And since I've been on council for the last 5 years, we've always had surpluses at year end. And most of them have been directed towards the operational reserve. Sometimes we direct it towards affordable housing. So we have some discretion as to what to do with those funds. But I feel that the amendment would be, and I don't know how, would you like me to write it out?
Yes.
Okay. So how could I word that to show that intent?
Are you talking about the $50,000
Yes,
additional?
contribution to reserves.
So it went
So
from 100 to 150,000, the estimation of the new growth?
Right.
And bear in mind that's only an estimate. So it's the $50,000 increase that you would want to propose to not direct to the reserve, but
So
rather
reduce the,
it's about 0.25%, say, of tax revenue.
yeah.
So
Would that be it? I mean, is it going to significantly reduce the 3.7? Is that what you're saying? It's not going to significantly reduce? 3.5.
say that again, Mr. Fart.
Down to 3.5. It is just under 0.25%, or just about 0.25%.
So the motion then would be to apply the $50,000 in estimated new tax growth to reduce the overall tax increase to 3.5%. Is that right? Yeah.
It probably would be preferable not to specify the number at 3.5%.
Okay. Just to reduce the overall tax
Yeah, if I may,
requirement.
I've been trying to quickly work on some wording. Councillor
So apply
Sanford?
the estimated tax growth.
I was saying that the $50,000 increase in municipal taxes from growth in 2018 be used to reduce the overall tax requirement.
Say that again?
That the $50,000 increase in municipal taxes from growth in 2018 be used to reduce the overall tax requirement.
That's clear. Is that?
I think that's my intent, and if that suits your intent, then that should be the wording that we use.
I just want to make sure that I've captured.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm saying.
Right. I think that is what you're saying.
Yeah.
So you could propose that as an amendment to this motion, and we can discuss that amendment.
That's all written out there?
It is. Do you
I'll
want
have
me
it
to
ready.
just say it again. It's not real pretty.
Sure.
That the $50,000 increase in municipal taxes from growth in 2018 be used to reduce the overall tax requirement.
We're just getting into the good stuff, and he's leaving. Okay, so you'll have that to put on the overhead when the time comes.
I'll write it out nicely.
Great. Councillor McCallum, you have a question.
Actually, question through the chair to administration. Could you please remind me what 1% tax increase is? That $220,000 or 200? 220. Thanks, Rick.
Okay, I'm just going slow here to give everybody a chance to write their things out. Beg your pardon?
The hurrier I go, the messier I get.
Okay. Okay, so unless there's other questions to the report, which I don't think there are, well, that would come as an amendment.
Yes.
So let's see the initial motion. I can go back to the... So I'll move the council approves the 2018 operating budget amendments as presented. That's the motion on the table. Councillor Sanford.
I would like to propose an amendment to that motion, and the wording on the screen that says that the $50,000 increase in municipal taxes from growth in 2018 be used to reduce the overall tax requirement. And my rationale for proposing this is that I know that we have discretionary use of our reserves at the year end, our surpluses, and we often do direct our surpluses into those reserves. We've actually created a new reserve this year, which is the maintenance reserve. So, I mean, we are getting very intentional about where we're directing the funds and for what we're going to use those funds. And I think we should realize that benefit in 2018 from the growth and reduce our tax requirements appropriately.
And so, to your point, you're anticipating that what are likely to be significant surpluses next year will likely be directed to reserves, therefore increasing the reserve balance?
And we have that discretion to do that at year end. So I think we should be doing that at year end as opposed to at the front end of the year.
I want to understand your argument.
Yeah. So when at year end, when we have those options, we have a good process for doing that. I think we should be doing that at year end as opposed to going into the year. Okay. Councillor Comfort?
So I just have a question, a general sort of question. We do have reserve, tax stabilization reserve. That's increased a great deal, I think, since 2013. No?
No.
Where is it now?
About 300,000 or something? Not a lot. 1.8, more than I remember.
It's more than you make in a week.
More than but whenever we talk about that, we recognize that it's... Finish your thought.
Well, I'm just thinking that it is quite an increase, I think, from when we started in 2013. I think it was around $500,000. I could be not, maybe have the numbers right. I don't know. No, he's not sure. But So when we add money to that reserve, where does that money come from? It would so would that be when we have a surplus, we add to that?
Tax stabilization reserve?
Yeah.
There's a policy on that.
Yeah, so it's in the reserves policy, and actually that's one of the reserves that doesn't really have a grade earmarked. We haven't really increased we haven't put any contributions in the tax stabilization other than interest earned since I've started, and that was 4.5 years ago.
And I don't recall actually ever using that reserve.
No, we try and avoid, not avoid using it. You know, if you use a reserve, which is a non-reoccurring source of revenue, to fund something that's going to be a reoccurring expense, that's not a sustainable position. So we hesitate to recommend that. It would have to be a situation where it's a one-off. And then that would make sense to use that as a source. If it's just going to be one-off, rather than increasing people's taxes for the one-off, you would draw from the tax stabilization to fund that one-off.
So if we had a big, I don't know, a big capital project
like
or
Olympics or something.
I don't know. Okay, thank
Yep.
you.
Councillor McCallum to the amending
Well,
motion.
historically, just to Councillor Comfort's question, historically, I believe we used the dollars in the tax stabilization fund to create a smoothing effect. So in particular, when we implemented the recommendations that came from the Property Tax Task Force, specifically to tourist home taxation and vacant home taxation, or vacant land taxation, I believe. We used that to sort of create a smoothing effect because we implemented it over several years. That's my historical recommendation, or recollection rather.
Respectfully,
No.
We didn't draw from the tax stabilization to do that. What we did is, rather than implementing the changes recommended by the Property Tax Task Force all in 1 year,
Yeah,
we did
it over a couple of years. That's what I was trying to say. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Okay, so there's an amending motion on the table. The $50,000 increase in municipal taxes from growth in 2018 be used to reduce the overall tax requirement. Speaking to that amending motion, I'll support the motion, Councillor Sanford. We're not talking about a lot of money, and I'm not even certain about that $50,000 number because it's an estimate. But I am keeping in mind that we're likely to see very significant reserves once the 2017 financials have been audited, and quite likely those will largely be directed to surplus, building surplus, and we are doing much more with real intent. We are applying more funding to the reserves out of each year's budget. Regardless, I can see the value in this motion, and I'll support it. Speaking to the amending motion, anyone else? Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, based on history, what history has taught us, and based on what our future may hold in terms of the possibility of co-hosting the Olympics, I think it would be prudent for us to stick this in our piggy bank. Understanding that we are going to have possible reserves, surpluses from 2017, it's actually not even dollars that we're 100% certain of yet. So I would prefer to see that still put in our municipal piggy bank to save in terms of meeting our reserve targets, as well as our possible obligations in terms of the 2026 Olympics, whether or not we are a co-bidder.
Anybody else speak to the amending motion? Councillor Comfort?
Sure. I think that I also would prefer to see this go towards reserves and have us eventually meet that target, rather than have that continue to be a seemingly receding target. We keep moving it ahead, so I think that I won't be able to support this motion.
Any other councillors speaking to the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question on the amendment on the overhead. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's defeated with Councillor Sanford, Mayor Borman in support. Back then to the,
And more.
oh, which way did you go?
I'll have to go here. Here, I'll go this arm instead.
You're voting in
I'm
support.
in favor, support.
Okay, sorry, missed that. I'll have to look more carefully. Yeah, move it. Okay then, back to the main motion, which was,
Which was?
the council approved the 2018 operating budget amendments as presented. Discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And this might be a good opportunity to take a wee break before we get back into the rest of the...
Yes.
Yeah. Quick break. And moving into capital projects.
Now that I've chased everyone away, we'll continue.
Okay, we got free rein.
It wasn't intentional.
Ms.
All right.
Benkaim-Pima.
2018 proposed capital amendments. All right, so we did the same thing, applied parameters when we were taking a look at what was proposed. So we're, again, had to be extraordinary. If it was something that we were postponing that was in 2018, we're going to move it out. We made sure we included that. New 2018 projects were considered on a case-by-case basis, so not everything made the cut. And then new projects proposed for years beyond 2018 were not included. We can deal with those when we deal with those years. 2017 projects that were canceled, that were postponing, those were included, as I mentioned earlier. And future years projects that we are bringing back into 2018 were included. And then, yeah, that's that. So based on those parameters, with that in mind, the capital, we originally presented 20 different capital project budget amendments to the Finance Committee. 2 were subsequently removed that were originally presented. One was the Quarry Lake Dog Park fencing. We require more study and consultation with the public before anything goes, if at all, with that. So we've removed that from the proposed amendments. We also had, to the Finance Committee, talked about having a project for green lights for firefighters' vehicles, so to increase or to better get them to the fire hall. What further look at some other studies have shown is that doesn't necessarily isn't the case. So the response times in studies have shown that the response times don't actually decrease with the use of green lights. So administration is not proposing to go forward with that amendment. But then there is one that was subsequently added after we presented to the Finance Committee, and that's the fire hall expansion or relocation planning. So it was originally out. And now with the changes, especially with the Municipal Government Act in regards to offsite levies for fire halls, when we're considering offsite levies, it's important for us to have the projects that are offsite leviable in our 5-year capital plan. But in order to do that, we need to do some planning. So we'd like to do that in 2018 to see what that looks like for the future. So, Mayor Borman?
I have a question about that.
Councillor Comfort.
Thank you. So I have a question about that. At what point can we start charging those offsite levies? Like, where do we put that revenue into the budget?
Yeah, so what we do is, as you may recall, we have now started an annual renewal or change amendments to the offsite levy bylaw. And so we were looking to start that process again in February, bringing it to council in the springtime. And hopefully by then all the MGA regulations will be in place so we can make sure we're doing it correctly. But what we have done is one of the organization and the members of the organization that is most impacted by offsite levies is BOTA. So what we do is we make, and MD of Bighorn to a lesser degree, so we make sure that those who are impacted by offsite levy fees are consulted with. And sort of part of how we've sort of come to sort of a standard procedure is BOTA's looking for the project to be in our 5-year capital planning horizon. And they're more amenable to considering projects that are in that planning summary rather than ones that don't show up there. And so that's why it's important to make sure that we do have a project if we are seriously considering some offsite levies that relate to fire halls, that it should be on the 5-year capital planning summary. But in order for us to do a good job of knowing exactly what we would need and what that would cost to get it in, we need to do some preliminary work, which would be this planning study for in 18.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so with that in mind, that's sort of how we got from what you saw at the Finance Committee to what you're seeing in your agenda package for the capital amendments tonight. Also to let you know that attachment number 4 provides you with the amended 2018 capital budget. So what does that include? It includes previously approved and as well as proposed amendments. So instead of just giving you the numbers for the amendments, what I've done is Mr. Irwin and I put together the package so that you see the whole thing. So this is what the 2018 capital would look like with those amendments, and giving you all of the project detail sheets for all of the projects rather than just what's changed. Hopefully that helps to understand what the whole picture is when you're considering those amendments this evening. It includes funding sources, new capital project numbering system, as well as the capital project detail sheets. So kind of the whole picture. The request for decision report that you have before you provides a chart of the amendments broken down into categories of changes or buckets like I had done with the operating. And as well as if there's a number change, and I talked about this a little bit earlier, if it had an old number that was 17 something and now it's 7,000 something, I tried to provide you with a column that gives you that continuity as to how the number has changed. And it also provides your funding source. So moving on to what are the buckets. So one of the first bucket to deal with is the changed funding source, and this is the Stoneworks Creek mitigation. Thanks to Mr. Irwin during the break. I'm going to proactively answer Councillor Comfort's question. So the original project on Stoneworks Creek was, a debenture was taken for $1.3 million. The project came in at just over $1.25 million. So basically, there was $45,000 more in debt taken than was required for actual costs. Then further to that, there was $200,000 in offsite levies that had been collected that should have been applied towards the project. Short answer, we took too much debt. So there was $245,000. We can't just spend it on anything. It has to be on Stoneworks Creek. That came to light as we were looking at budget amendments. So it doesn't make sense. We'd like to change the funding source from the general capital reserve and actually fund that portion from this leftover money.
So, I know I asked the question sometime earlier, maybe it was an agenda review, but so there was that money that was left in a reserve that was debenture funded, so we couldn't spend it on anything except that project. So what would happen to those funds if we never did anything else on that specific project? Would they just sit there in limbo for
They'd
eternity?
sit there until we had a project that it qualified for. So I believe I had a discussion with yourself. Can't we just send the money back? So the way that the financing goes with Alberta Capital Finance Authority is there's not a savings by paying off a debenture early. It's for that whole period of time. If you pay it off early, which this sort of would be a version of that, you still pay the same amount of interest. So it doesn't make sense to send it back and still pay the same amount of interest when we can keep it in our bank account and earn interest. And then we can apply it to a project, because I'm pretty sure Stoneworks Creek will probably have some more work on it in the future. We just have to make sure that we're cognizant that we're spending that money on Stoneworks Creek.
Mm-hmm. If there never was another Stoneworks Creek project, arguably we would end up paying off that debenture and still have the money sitting in a reserve.
Well, we could use then that $30,000 to help make the debenture payment, but like the regular payment.
It'll never happen, so I'm not going to beat this one to death. Okay, Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Your Worship. When we're asked to approve a debenture, we normally approve an upside amount, a top amount. Mm-hmm. And from what I understand, if we don't take the money, you know, we determine what the actual cost is before we take the money. So how did we end up taking more money than the actual cost of this project?
This happened before we started following that procedure.
Oh, okay. So this was a gap in understanding of...
I swear it was before my time.
Yeah. No, no, it's just that when, I mean, we have approved many, many debentures in the last few years, and it's usually with the understanding that we approve it, but then we don't actually draw the amount of money. And so you're saying that we changed our practice to account for that?
Yeah. So, you know, we've talked about this before. There's two things we're doing differently. The first thing is we don't budget for 100% of the project to come from debentures. What we do, because never is the cost going to come in exactly on budget, very rarely. So what we do is we always leave a little bit that's going to come out of usually a general capital reserve for that wiggle room. As well, one of the advantages to having cash-backed reserves is it funds a cash flow. So we don't need to borrow in order to have the money to pay for the project as the project's happening. We can self-fund it, and then we don't have to borrow, take the debenture until we actually know how much that is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for that clarification, because I couldn't understand how this happened, but it happened before we changed our practice to counteract this kind of thing.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And wasn't that project, it was initiated before the 2013 flood,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and then it hadn't been completed, and there may have been more work to do on the project, but then 2013 came along and wiped out the project that had been done. So that was wrapped up in the reason there was money left in the from the debenture, I thought. Mr. Fark?
No, the project was actually completed. It just did not withstand the 2013 flood, which is why we're doing additional work on this creek now.
So it was complete,
Yes,
but at a less cost than we had budgeted.
correct.
I see. Okay.
Which is generally what we hope happens with projects.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Okay. So I'll move on to the next budget, which is items that have been pushed out. So Railway Avenue, 2018 original budget is for $4 million worth of work to happen in 2018. We need to do some preliminary work at a cost of $1 million, so we're proposing to push $3 million out of 2018 and move it forward into 2019. And then related to that, because what we do try and do is whenever we're tearing up a road, we take into consideration if there's any deep utility replacement that has to happen and try and dovetail that with that work so that the road doesn't get torn up twice. So there was a deep utility replacement project, and now we're proposing to push that out as well to be in line with Railway Avenue. So for $1 million, you'll get some design work. Construction wouldn't happen to 2019. Then there's the pulled in project, so stuff that was further out, we're proposing to pull into 2018. So there's the senior center exterior envelope, repairs and maintenance. What we're looking from, there was original in 2020, a budget of $335,000. Doing some more preliminary work, it has been determined that some things just can't wait till 2020. They're more urgent than that, and they're gonna cost more than we thought. So this is pulling in $335 and increasing the budget. So the total for that project would be $400,000. The other one is the fire hall planning. So we originally budgeted $65,000 in 2020 for that fire hall planning I talked about earlier. It looks like it's going to be more than that. It's going to be $150,000, so we're proposing to pull it in and increase that budget as well. For the senior center, we talked before about it's the window and the roof and the eavesdropping and exterior lighting and railings and doors and things like that. So the next budget, or bucket for the budget, is 2017 items moved to 2018. So those are those canceled projects we talked about earlier this evening. So I'm not going to go in a bunch of detail, but those are the 6 projects that we talked about before. So, yeah.
I meant to ask this some other time, but the public washrooms in Riverside Park, do we know where they're going to be placed yet, or is that something yet to be determined?
We have a good sense of where they will be placed. However, the final placement will depend on some community consultation that will need to occur. So they will be situated close to the Bow River Bridge on the, I guess that is the south.
Where that big metal sculpture is?
Not far from the big metal sculpture, but again, the final placement will require some community consultation.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
All right, next bucket. New grant projects. So there's the shared information governance feasibility study of $30,000. So we did get a grant for that. XYZ Creek's hazard assessment. The total project cost of $225,000. 90% of it comes from grants. The other 10% from general capital. And then same thing with the Echo Creek hazard assessment. Total project cost of $120,000. 90% from grants. The other 10% from general capital. And those are unchanged from our discussion at the Finance Committee. The next bucket is new reserves funded projects. There's my street sweeper. I'm hoping we'll get something a little fancier than that. But and TP Town. And so the first one is Bow Valley Trail and TP Town transportation planning for $130,000. That's engagement and conceptual design work. The street sweeper, hopefully bigger than a broom. We want to increase the budget by $30,000 as preliminary discussions and feeling out the providers. We've determined that the original budget was insufficient. So it's not a $30,000 street sweeper, it's that plus $30,000. And then the roll-off container replacement of $20,000, the lift station 2 upgrade of $1.245 million, wastewater treatment plant upgrade of $526,000. All of those, I mean, these numbers are unchanged from when we discussed them before. I won't continue to blather at you about them unless you have some questions. In your package are updated debt and reserve graphs. If these amendments are all made, sort of the financial impact of all of these proposed capital budget changes is that we would have an increase in draws from the general capital reserve of $169,500. The utility reserves are the ones that will take a bigger hit. It would increase draws from the utility reserves, that's the solid waste services and wastewater reserves, by $1.79 million. But it's important to note that part of, I had mentioned earlier, Mr. Como did some work and pushed some projects out to try and lessen some of the impact on the utility reserves, and all of that I wanted to assure Council would not result in a rate change for utilities. The reserves will be able to withstand that impact. Also in your package are attachments 5 and 6. Attachment 5 provides you with the 2018 through 2021 amended capital planning summary. So it's the previously approved as well as the proposed amendments all mixed together. So what would it look like if you approved these amendments this evening, as well as the funding sources for each of them. And then attachment number 6 is the graphs that I mentioned. What would things look like if you were to approve these amendments? Another area in my report talks about the financial impacts. So there's operating, which we already decided there was no net impact. For capital, the operating transfer to capital, so every year there's a certain amount of the operating dollars or the tax dollars that are used to fund that year's capital, so that remains unchanged with these amendments. The general capital reserve draws has a slight increase. The grants that are the non-municipal sustainability initiative grants, we've had just over $340,000 more. The MSI grant remains unchanged. And then there's the 2 reserve changes for the utility reserves that I talked about, sort of broken down between the 2. I just wanted to also let Council know that the plan that administration has after this evening, once we know what amendments you've proposed, I will go to work putting together an addendum to the current 2017 and 18 budget and business plan. I'm not going to go in and change that document because that document is an approved document, but I will provide an addendum to it so that to make sure that the document does reflect what Council's decisions are tonight and hopefully makes it easier for the reader to sort of follow the bouncing ball and incorporate it. So we do have a formal document that does incorporate what decisions are made this evening. So with that, we're up to 2 recommendations. One is to approve the 2018 capital budget as amended, and then the next one is for the planning, the 2018 to 2021 capital planning summary. And at this point, I would welcome any other questions that you might have.
Yeah, I do. Just before we get there, and it's a long ways to get there, but you said as amended, but the written version says as presented.
The Council approved the 2018 capital budget as presented.
Yeah, as presented.
Yeah.
Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. So just a couple of questions. So there's no increases whatsoever to water and waste this year?
No, there's the ones that were already planned.
Okay.
And then were approved as part of the budget process before.
For 2018?
Yeah.
And what are those numbers?
Help. Okay. Yeah.
It's my recollection.
But I would like to double check that. So when I said that, The utilities rates wouldn't change because of what we do
Because the
doing
change in the
tonight. There is
projects.
still a change,
Yeah,
but that change wouldn't change
gotcha.
because
All
of
right.
this.
Perfect. And so Project 7028, the TP Town Bow Valley Trail project, so that project is going to be for basically public engagement and design.
Yes.
And then how soon, or do you see it reflected any of the capital project sheets in the 4-year plan as to any actioning on that? Is that at all been embedded in there? Like, we know that we're doing the design on Railway Ave, and so therefore there's the capital projects that fall out of that over the following years. And of course, I'm scrambling to talk and find the page at the same time.
That's okay.
Which page in the package is the 4-year capital plan, sorry?
And that is on, please hold.
Jeez.
Flipping. See, I'm doing the same thing you.
This is the point where I'm about to get lectured for not having a printed copy
Page
of the agenda.
138,
Thank you, Your
Thank-
Worship.
Thank you.
130,
135.
35 to 38.
135. Thank you. 27.
And then the engineering ones are on page 136.
Mr. Fark, did you have something?
Apparently, a polite cough actually does work.
Yes, it does.
So, in answer to the question, the engineering department carries a budget in the 5-year capital plan for years that are not approved in the capital budget, but they carry lines for complete street. Actually, let me just pull up the complete street rehab and the street and drainage rehab. So those are placeholders that because we know we have to spend a certain amount of money every year in order to update and maintain our transportation network. But we only provide the details of those locations once we get closer into the, or once we get to the approval process. So what we anticipate is we'll do the design for Bow Valley Trail next year, and that will inform future years' budgets. But on smaller cap projects, because for large transportation projects, capital planning projects, Railway Avenue is what is on our plate for the next 3 to 4 years. So in that same time period, there may be small complete street or rehab connectivity components that we plan out as a result of this planning process to hold us over until we get to Bow Valley Trail, which is the next big transportation project after we complete railway. Yes.
I know, but it's important to the people of TP Town, so.
Yes.
I promised I would come here and ask these questions, and I've asked these questions at the review, and so on and so forth, so I'm gonna keep asking related questions.
Yes. And hopefully I have adequately answered your question. Yes.
I'll direct them to your email address. Thank you.
Mr. Asarte's email address,
Yes,
please.
yes.
If I may, Your Worship, I consulted with Mr. Irwin in regards to the question for the utilities. So if you will recall, on the current budget and business plan on page 25, it talks about what the changes are going to be for the rates. And remember how we changed to the Alberta water and wastewater, and it depends, and we're evening between residential and non-residential. And so there's no straight, easy answer for you. The straight answer is these amendments will not make those changes any different than what they were originally presented. Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Your Worship. Ms. Van Kampima, I'm just looking at the budget item 7034 and 7035, and which is on page 31 of my
Street sweeper and
the street
gravel
sweeper
truck.
and the gravel truck.
Yes.
And as an identified funding source, we have MSI in general and MSI.
Mm-hmm.
On your previous slide, you said that there was no more MSI funding, but this is pre-allocated, is that what happened?
Yeah, so
this
it's
is from
just
a
the
previous-
changes, right?
Okay.
So if we had allocated MSI dollars, but it maybe was out further, but now it's going to be in closer, that really has no net impact
Right.
on that funding source. It just
So-
may be used sooner.
Yeah, so we're using MSI funds that were allocated to us in the past as a lump sum, but we haven't gotten any more MSI funding.
Correct, we only get so much a year and,
Right.
yeah.
Okay, so this MSI allocation is from a previous draw on MSI.
It was already planned to be that draw from MSI,
Right.
so
But
these amendments don't change that.
But it was from a different pot of money that was MSI, that we got through MSI, correct?
Yeah, so we don't have to so we plan further ahead than we get, we don't wait to get the MSM money and then spend it. What we do is we anticipate how much we're gonna get, and then we plan for that money. So this is part of that plan, and it was going to be future money anyway.
Okay, but we haven't gotten any more?
No, well, we get MSI every year. And so the amount, we don't know for sure how much we're gonna get until the province announces it, but we have not changed the budget to consider if we're gonna get more or less MSI.
I thought there was a sort of a downturn in our allocation of MSI in the last few years.
Yes.
There's MSI operating as well. And
Yeah.
it used to be capital, and capital sort of dried up, but operating is year to year. MSI operating.
So we have been getting some. I just thought that we hadn't gotten some for a long
Yeah,
period of
no,
time.
yeah, the MSI funding, when it was first promised, it was supposed to be over a 10-year
Right.
period, and then they said, oh, well, no, it's gonna go over a longer period of time, so you got less each year, and then we weren't sure if it was gonna be extended. So in general, from the start to now, we do get less in MSI capital than we had originally were led to believe we would receive.
Okay, that's what I was just trying to understand, is that we're spending something that we were supposed to get more of, but there's less of it now.
Correct.
Okay.
But we are budgeting conservatively for the MSI capital grant money, so we're not keeping it at the level they said right at the beginning.
Right.
We're basing it on actuals, and that's what we budget for how much we would have available to spend on projects.
Okay, thank you for that.
Mr. Irwin's standing up like he's got something burning.
No? Okay.
I just have a few questions from the capital project sheets. The first one, the deep utility replacement, doesn't have a project number. Is that because it's just recurring, or?
No. Let me
That's the
find out
first
how
one
come.
in that section, page 33 of the agenda.
Oh, and that's because it's been pushed out, right? So we're not, so we're only going to give a project number to those projects that are in 18. And so now we're pushing it out of 18 into
right,
19.
so there's a $0 budget.
Right.
Right,
Yeah.
okay, thanks. And then just random question about the senior center project. Part of what we're doing is demolishing the vestibule at southward main entrance. What's that? Trying to visualize what the vestibule at the southward main entrance might be. Anyone?
So I would generally describe a vestibule as a extension to an entranceway. And so I assume that almost similar to the type of concept we have at the door here, there's a physical structure at the entrance, that southern entrance, that needs to be removed. It's not, it is not helpful. It's a physical structure around an entryway that...
Yeah, I understand what you said, I just can't
but it was,
visualize it in the building I've been in for the last 30 years.
Yeah, I believe it's the one by the stairs where it was initially done in order to...
Oh, that little, maybe you're talking about that little vestibule where you go in and up the stairs?
Yes, yes.
That little vestibule.
Yes, yes.
So that's going to be demolished. So the stairs from the second floor will just spill out into an open area then?
Yes, precisely.
Whew, glad I cleared that up. Councillor Comfort?
Yeah, thank you. I think that this question is for admin. It's just regarding the Bow Bridge corridor. So that was for the integrated transportation plan, I believe, master plan. That was canceled out of last year's, and I wondered if it's going back in at some point. I know there's redesign and so forth, so I just wonder what's happening with that project, because it had been a priority and now it's kind of on the back burner. So just an update, if you please. To Mr. Park.
Mr. Fark?
Unless Ms. Cottle would like to answer that question.
Ms.
Dr. Cottle,
DeSoto?
sorry. No, sorry.
Oh.
Fight over it.
So I'm quite happy to answer the question. So if you recall, we came to council earlier this year with a request to, when we went to start the project for Railway Avenue and the design for Railway Avenue, the conclusion we very quickly came to was that we did not have sufficient information to move to detailed design. We needed a certain level of network analysis and design standard in order to be able to do that. And that equally applied to what we had planned to do along the Bow Bridge corridor and even the intersection at 8th and 8th. So we went to council earlier this year to get your direction and your permission to essentially do an update to the Integrated Transportation Master Plan, which is work that is currently ongoing. That will provide us that network level analysis, which will essentially define which streets need to meet what definition and how they will look. And then once we have that work, then we will apply that lens to the Bow Bridge corridor and bring that back at a future date. But we couldn't do that work until we have this network analysis in place.
So we just took this, that was taken out of the previous year's budget, or 2017, I think it was. And it won't be replaced until we've got the detail that we need. That's what I heard you say. Okay.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Question on project 7014, the signage for West Palliser Trail density, or signage and West Palliser Trail density. So it references the budget is specifically to engage volunteers and help with that. Well, I guess signage is part of it. So would there have to be a RFP process or some sort of a process to engage to contract a volunteer group, or is that?
So what we have done historically, in this case, because the volunteers obviously are not getting paid, and so the funds that would be provided to them are specifically hard costs, infrastructure, materials, that sort of thing. What we've done is we've gone out in the past to the different associations within the town and invited them all to participate in the process and the discussion. So for example, at the Quarry Lake Bike Trail, we have both CTA and CAMBA who are working on that cooperatively together.
Okay, so that, I guess that answers my question. You just go out to the known groups of volunteers and see if there's interest.
Correct.
Thank you. On project 724, active transportation projects, it references cycling without age. And so improvements for accessibility, cycling without age, $50,000. Is that to acquire new or more trishaws?
No, it is not. So it is to do things like curb smoothing and addressing transition spots in order to allow for accessibility, so that things like the trishaws, people with mobility impairments, are able to move around more freely.
Anybody ever talk at any time about getting more trishaws, just out of curiosity?
Not to my understanding. We have two that are dearly loved and greatly used, but there's a volunteer network that is needed to support that, and I understand that that network is sort of at its capacity.
Okay. Someday it'd be nice, 'cause it's pretty neat. And project 723, the Stones Canyon Creek mitigation, the budget funding is just noted as being other. Is that a developer funding? Yes?
I believe that's the case. Let me just
There's
do a
the other
double
one
check.
that other is specifically
Yeah, it's the
identified.
developer. So if you look in your agenda package on page 31, There's the Excel spreadsheet that shows the 2018 capital budget. So project 7023 is listed near the top of that page. And so the total is 80,000, 40,000 from the general reserve and 40,000 under other. And then the
Right.
note to the side
Yeah.
says developer.
Right, so it's actually, I guess, the 7019 that I had the same question on,
Yeah.
but it doesn't identify developer as being the other.
Okay.
In the project sheet, 7019.
And I will
Just-
find you an answer. Okay, my answer, I hope, is going to come from Mr. Fark.
Mr. Fark,
Yes.
who's the other?
So I can, yes, in both cases. So in the case of Stone Canyon Creek, that is the creek in Peaks of Grassy. So in that
Yeah.
case, it is the developer. In the case of Stoneworks Creek, that funding source came as a result of an agreement and a discussion we had with Stantec, who did the original flood mitigation work on that creek. And so there is a funding contribution from their side
Great.
towards.
I wonder if there's a way we could reflect something in there other than other. Others just too random, but anyways, I'll leave it
For
now.
a number of reasons, that is not
Okay,
practical.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
I may have
Oh,
already said too much. They may.
are you muttering over there? Muttering? Just one request on 7044. Can we capitalize the acronym TAN instead of, looks like we're looking for suntan approvals, which I know is not. Well, it's capitalized within the body of the report because it's an acronym.
Yes, we can do that.
Did you see that? I agree. I think I'm just gonna take a little moment here. Who runs these meetings? You. Okay, thank you. Okay, just for that, I do have one other question. I wasn't gonna, but Project 7032, the tennis court resurfacing at Veterans Park. So we're budgeting 10,000. And I recall when we did last resurface Lion Park courts, which admittedly there's more, was like 150, 200,000 or something. It was a huge amount of money to resurface those courts.
So
And?
the short answer to that question is the specific agreement we have with the tennis group is that they will fundraise to support the rehabilitation work of those courts. So that is the reason for that.
Okay, super duper. Are there any other questions regarding the capital projects? No? Then I'll move the council approve the 2018 capital budget as presented. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And I'll move the council accept for planning purposes the 2018 to 2021 capital planning summary as presented. Discussion on that motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. We'll move on to item G3. Oh, that's after in camera. Well, I'll move council go in camera. Those in favor? Opposed? We're in camera. I missed her once. Okay, so I'll move that council appoint Tamara Ross to a 2-year term on the Canmore Public Art Committee. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried unanimously. And I'll move council be adjourned for the last time this year. Oh. Discussion, those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously.